Hey there, welcome to Spectrum Pulse, where we talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And here's something that I have not done in some time, another unscripted movie review, this time of the newest animated feature from Dreamworks, The Wild Robot. Alright, full disclosure, when this first showed up on my Patreon schedule, I had no idea what it was. I had not seen any marketing from it. Not in trailers, not anything on social media. It looked actually really damn pretty, so maybe something may be able to come of it, but I also don't go out of my way to follow what happens with family films in some way or the other. So, you know what? One way or the other could be interesting. I've always had a certain reticence towards a lot of Dreamworks films, especially alongside Disney. I think Dreamworks can tend to cater to overstocking the ship with a lot of big name voice actors, and there are some pretty big names attached to this. Lupita Nyong'o, Pedro Pascal, Mark Hamill, Catherine O'Hara. So again, I wasn't sure what I was going to be winding up with there. If anything, the marketing seemed to play up the animated style and presentation of it all, and so, okay, I kind of went in blind. And you know what? I get why this is getting a lot of rave reviews. A lot of people are calling this one of DreamWorks' best in some time, especially in terms of its stylism, the animation, and the story. I just think that as much as I can appreciate certain elements of it a lot, and it did wind up grabbing my heartstrings more than, well, let's be honest, most DreamWorks family entertainment, I do think there are slight issues that I think detract from me from calling it legit great or above and beyond. Even though I do think this is probably going to get nominated for awards and potentially could compete. So the story is that a robot, that kind of a droid that's being designed as an all-purpose household assistant, crashes on a deserted island full of animals and then kind of makes friends with the animals, two in particular, a fox and some form of goose. The robot eventually comes into something of a maternal role, specifically around that young baby goose, and has to nurture this goose to health and join the migration. Okay, look, a lot of the family film structure is very much here. You're not coming to a lot of this expecting massive plot twists, and even then, if you understood this sort of structure, you will guess all of them right off the bat. Where I think this really excels in a couple places is the stylism that is here, in that it feels like this is a gorgeous movie in terms of the computer animation with a more painterly style. A lot of the cinematic tableaus are really effective, and given that you have a robot that doesn't really convey a lot of facial expressions, there has to be a lot of work done in terms of gesture and posture and movement in order to convey emotion, and the gradual increasing, well, humanity is the wrong word, but the gradual empathy that this robot discovers for life is actually rather impressive to see how it plays out. And yeah, while the animal animation, it's cartoonish, but it's also really, really pretty. And I think that it's actually the increased stylism around it, given that you barely see any humans in this movie at all. I think that plays to the central conceit of this well. If anything, you see more robots than you do see humans. Now, one thing I will say is that when you actually look at that pretty stacked list of voice actors, you actually probably won't recognize that many of them. You'll see certain actors that might have certain timbres that might feel familiar, but until you take a look at the list of credits, this is not a movie that is banking very heavily off of its list of names, and I think that's probably a good thing. I like the fact that this doesn't feel like you have a celebrity voice that's going to take someone completely out of the experience, and I think that also allows you to focus more on the arc. Although I will say that the writing is a little bit more dense than you would expect for a family movie. It feels like they try to cram a lot of jokes in there that would play to a more adult audience, but not in a way that feels obtrusive. This is not a movie that relies heavily on kids' humor. It more relies on the stylism to enrapture that kids. And I actually think it's clever just enough to potentially rope in that adult audience that might be caught up in the more parentage arc that absolutely takes place across the first and second act of the movie. I'll also say this, the score is excellent. It's more percussive and bombastic, but it blends in some of those more mechanical elements, or the stuff that would lean closer to a pop song or a modern pop song, with something that feels more organic overall. And it does lend the film a pretty nice texture in playing off a lot of what you see here. And texture, again, it really is the name of the game. You have a relatively simple and stock storyline, but there's so much polish that comes in the animation, the score, and the dynamics around that structure to really tart it up and make it look really, really impressive. However, I do find there's a couple issues with it. The first and predominant being structural. It has the feel, if anything, of 3 episodes that could have been stretched out for like a mini series on Netflix or Disney, well, not Disney Plus, but it could have been stretched out to stack each 3 apart from each other. You can really tell how each act is very firmly demarcated, and I don't think that's exactly a bad thing in terms of storytelling and sequencing, but I will say it does mean that you can kind of telegraph every single piece that is coming, especially if you're familiar with the sort of storytelling. I also think that the 3rd act in particular, it feels a little bit rushed and jumbled. I know they needed additional conflict, but in terms of the central emotional relationship between the robot and the creatures of the island and especially that central Gosling. But I feel like the forced conflict with the robot at the end kind of didn't do as much as it could have to really connect. And while I do think the ending is legit kind of touching and what it actually does commit to doing, I think it probably could have conveyed it a little bit more effectively without the over-the-top bombast, even if I think the over-the-top bombast is strikingly rendered. The other thing I will say is that this is a movie that I feel like could have gone in one of 2 ways in terms of playing to something that's very family-friendly with a lot of sillier jokes and sillier moments, but also does want to cater to an older audience, to the point where I can see people making comparisons to other concepts like WALL-E alongside the Wild Robot, because there are some parallels. Even if you wanted to make, say, chunks of this movie have no voice acting whatsoever, I would have been on board. It would have been a little bit more art house, but it would have been more daring and probably more difficult to market, but that shouldn't be that's the problem of the marketers. That's not the problem of the movie. I think it could have been a little more daring, but I think they've tried to hedge their bets a bit. Try to actually have those deeper, more thoughtful ideas that might be above and beyond for a traditional kids animated cartoon, and then they also had to have some of those. And trying to strike the balance has been a little tricky, and you can see at the edges where this movie is straining to be a little bit more artsy, a little bit more thoughtful in certain moments, trying to get to more adult moments of catharsis that I'm not sure fits as cleanly within a very family-friendly structure to which it does feel beholden, especially structurally. But overall, I do think the movie is good. It's kind of hard to say a lot about it because, again, family movies don't exactly give a ton of weight to the themes, especially when they are hammered so aggressively. It kind of takes the point when you have an adult-focused movie, but it has to cater to kids' audiences, that some of the themes can be very directly spelled out where you can almost predict some of the lines of dialogue. But I also don't think it's bad. When you're playing within those confines, there are certain things that I think are absolutely nailed. It is a gorgeous-looking, gorgeous-sounding movie. I think that a lot of the art design, the humor especially, often lands way better than it has any right to. And quite frankly, I did enjoy it. This is a movie that's not getting a ton of promotion. I have no idea why. But if you put this in front of kids or adults, I think both of them can get something out of it. And while I think it's a smidge away from true transcendent greatness, this was a lot of fun. I do think it's worth listening or seeing. If you guys get a chance, go check it out. It actually deserves to do well, and maybe if you do more in this direction, Dreamworks might get a slightly better reputation. We'd have to see. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you want to see more, please be sure to like, share, drop comments, subscribe. Yeah, again, I'm a little bit surprised that I'm reviewing this, but it did show up on my Patreon docket, and somebody who's in that high enough of a tier, I'm not going to say no, especially as I've said no a number of times already. Beyond that, though, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And if you guys want to get involved in my schedule so I cover more movies or more albums, well, there's the option for YouTube memberships, but then there's also the Patreon option for the higher level contributors as well. Options are available, and again, thank you all so much for supporting. I really do appreciate it. Until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.